11:41 p.m. The transcript is dated 400 years after the battle, and it begins, as these things often do, with an apology. "My name does not matter," the speaker says, and you can hear in the recording that he believes it. "I am an archivist of the Velthun Concord, 3rd rank, and I have been granted permission to correct the record. For 4 centuries, my people have taught their children a lie about what happened at the edge of the Karrun Drift. I have spent my life among the true documents. I am old now, and I would like to die having said the thing that is true. So listen. I am going to tell you about the day the Concord's finest captains laughed at a species of soft, short-lived animals from a backwater star, and about what came out of the dark to answer that laughter. I am going to tell it honestly. That is the only apology I have to offer the dead. You have to understand first what the Concord was," the archivist says, "because if you do not understand our arrogance, you will not understand our ruin. We had been the dominant power of the local arm for 9,000 years. 9,000. We had absorbed 40 species into the Concord, some by treaty and some by a kind of polite conquest that we did not call conquest. We had a name for the lesser peoples we encountered, the unrisen. It was not, we told ourselves, an insult. It was a category. The unrisen were those who had not yet developed the higher faculties, the long patience, the deep computation, the unhurried wisdom that came, we believed, only with a long natural lifespan and a slow metabolism. We Velthun lived 400 of your years. We thought slowly and we thought well. We considered haste to be a disease of the lesser mind. And then we found the humans. By every measure that the Concord used to weigh a species, the humans were a joke. They lived 80 years, 90 if they were fortunate, and they spent the first quarter of that learning to speak and the last quarter forgetting how. They were frantic. They were loud. Their history, the little of it we intercepted, was a blood-soaked carnival of war after war after war, a species that could not go 3 of its tiny generations without trying to exterminate itself. They had crawled off their single world only a few centuries before we found them, and they had done it, our analysts noted with open contempt, in machines that were essentially controlled explosions, sitting on top of a bomb and lighting it and praying. No patience, no wisdom, just the desperate scrabbling haste of an animal that knows in its blood that it has no time. The Concord's first assessment of humanity ran to 10,000 pages, and concluded in a single sentence that every Velthun child of my generation could recite from memory. A species that dies before it learns cannot be permitted to hold weapons among the risen. That was the policy, that was the law. And the law required an enforcement, and the enforcement was given to the 9th Pursuit Fleet, under the 3 captains whose names I will now give you, because they earned their place in this record and they should not be allowed to hide in the comfortable anonymity of the Concord decided. Captain Cethrin Vale, Captain Orem Dask, Captain Lyadney Soar, the 3 finest tacticians the Concord had produced in 1,000 years, slow-thinking, patient, brilliant. Each of them older than the entire span of human civilization. Each of them certain, with the bottomless certainty of the long-lived, that nothing a Mayfly built could threaten an oak. I have read their private logs from before the battle. That is part of what I was permitted to access. And I want you to hear how they spoke about the thing they were sent to do, because 400 years of our teaching has painted them as grim and reluctant executioners, and they were not. They were amused. The humans had built a forward station at the edge of the Karrun Drift, the archivist continues. A trading post, really, and a small naval garrison to protect it, 6 warships and a scattering of support craft. It sat at the boundary of space the Concord considered its own, though the humans, in their haste and their ignorance, did not know this. They had simply found a useful gravitational shelf at the edge of a beautiful nebula and built there, the way humans always built, quickly, untidily, and with a kind of stubborn permanence, as though they intended to stay forever despite having no reason to believe they would live to see next year. Captain Vale's fleet arrived to deliver the Concord's law, 40 warships, each one a sculpted masterwork of 9,000 years of refinement, grown rather than built, their hulls a living ceramic that healed its own wounds, their weapons capable of patient, surgical annihilation. Against them 6 human ships, boxes of welded metal, crude, loud even in the silence of space, their engines leaking heat and radiation like wounded things. What happened next was recorded by both sides, and the recordings do not disagree, which is rare and which is why I trust them. Captain Vale opened a channel. He did not have to. The law did not require warning. The unrisen were not owed the courtesy of negotiation. But Vale was a connoisseur of the moment, and he wanted, I think, to savor it. He addressed the human commander, a woman named Ada Reyes, of whom more later, much more, and he spoke to her in the trade tongue slowly, the way you speak to a child or an animal. I have the transcript. I will read you the part that my people spent 400 years pretending was never said. Small creature, Vale said, I have read your history, I have read all of it, it took me an afternoon. You are a species that has never once solved a problem without violence, and you have come to the edge of the risen worlds with 6 toys and a great deal of noise. I am going to do you a kindness your own kind has never managed. I am going to make your ending quick and clean and quiet, 3 things your entire civilization has never been. Power down your weapons. There is no shame in it. A mayfly cannot be blamed for being a mayfly. You simply were not given enough time to become anything that matters. And Captain Reyes, and this is recorded, this is real, you can hear it in the archival audio, Captain Reyes laughed. Not a frightened laugh, not a defiant one, a tired laugh, the laugh of a woman who has heard a variation of this speech before and is bone weary of it. And she said one sentence in reply, and that sentence is the only thing every human alive still knows about the Battle of the Karrun Drift, 400 years later, though almost none of them know the rest. She said, you read our history in an afternoon, and you think it's a record of our failures. It's a record of what we survive. Then she cut the channel, and Captain Vale, mildly amused, mildly annoyed, gave the order to destroy the human station and its 6 ridiculous ships. Now I have to stop the story, the archivist says, and his recorded voice changes here, grows careful, grows old. I have to stop it, because the rest of what happened cannot be understood inside the frame that Vale and the Concord brought to it. To understand the rest, you have to leave the Concord's perspective, and you have to go, uncomfortably, against every instinct 9,000 years of superiority has bred into a Velthun, inside the human one. So I am going to do something no Concord historian has ever done. I am going to tell you the next part the way the humans recorded it, from their side of the line. I have spent 40 years translating their logs, and I have come to know these short-lived creatures better, I think, than any of my people ever wished to. Let me show you what Vale was actually looking at when he laughed. Ada Reyes had been a soldier for 30 of her 80 allotted years, which the Velthun considered a contemptibly short career, and which Ada considered a long one, because most of the people she had started with were dead. This is the thing the Concord never understood, and it is the thing that killed them. They saw a short lifespan and read it as a weakness, a flicker, a candle, a creature too brief to accumulate wisdom. What they could not see, because their own slow centuries blinded them, was what a species becomes when every single one of its members knows, with total certainty from childhood, that its time is desperately short. It does not become wise in the slow Velthun way. It becomes something else. It becomes urgent. A human does not have 9,000 years to perfect a warship. A human has, at most, 40 working years to matter, and then they are gone, and everything they learn dies with them unless they can hand it down. And so humans became, over their bloody frantic history, the finest teachers and the finest learners in the galaxy, not because they were gifted, but because they were running out of time, always, every one of them, and they knew it. A Velthun engineer might refine a single weapon system across 3 unhurried centuries. A human civilization threw 10,000 engineers at the same problem, each one burning their brief candle at both ends, each one racing to solve it before their own death, each one handing the half-finished work to a younger generation that took it up with the same terrible haste. And the result was that humanity advanced not slowly and beautifully like a growing oak, but in violent, compounding, exponential leaps, like a fire crossing dry grass. The Concord measured a species' technology by its elegance. The humans did not build elegant things. They built things that worked, and then they built better things before the paint was dry, and they did it fast, because fast was the only speed death left them. And there was something else. Something the Velthun, in their long, safe, comfortable lives, had lost the capacity to even perceive. The humans were not afraid to die. Not because they were brave in some abstract, noble way, the archivist's voice tightens here, but because death was simply normal to them. It was the water they swam in. Every human who ever lived made peace, one way or another, with the certainty of their own ending, because they had no choice. The alternative was to spend their brief life paralyzed with terror. And a species that has made peace with death, that genuinely does not flinch from it, is a thing that no calculation of the long-lived can ever properly weigh. Because every Velthun strategy, every tactic in 9,000 years of warfare, rested on a single unspoken assumption, that the enemy, like us, wished above all else to live. The humans did not share that assumption. The humans had buried that assumption with their dead, 100 billion times over, across 100,000 years of a history written in funerals. That was what Captain Vale laughed at. He laughed at the 6 Crude ships and the short-lived woman, and he did not understand. He could not understand. His long, safe life had made it impossible for him to understand that he was not looking at 6 toys and a mayfly. He was looking at the edge of something that had spent its entire violent existence learning, at desperate speed, how to die well and make the enemy pay for it. And behind those 6 ships, strung out across 40 light-years and running silent toward the Karrun Drift at speeds the Concord did not believe possible, was the rest of the answer to Captain Reyes' laugh. Here is what Ada Reyes had done, the archivist says, and even now, 400 years later, I find I cannot tell it without something that I am ashamed to recognize as awe. She had known the Concord was coming. Humans, being short-lived and paranoid and frantic, were superb at one thing above all others, assuming the worst and preparing for it in a hurry. The garrison at the Karrun Drift had not been a trading post defended by an afterthought of 6 ships. It had been bait. A deliberate, calculated provocation, planted at the edge of Concord space precisely because human intelligence had concluded that the Concord could not resist swatting it, and that the Concord's contempt would bring its fleet out into the open, into a single predictable place, at a single predictable time. The 6 ships were real, the garrison was real. Ada Reyes and her crews were real, and they knew, this is the part I cannot get past, this is the part that breaks me. They knew they were bait. They knew the 6 ships could not survive what was coming. They had volunteered anyway, every one of them, because a human will spend their brief and only life on a thing they believe in. And they had decided, these short-lived animals, that the survival of their entire species was worth the 80 years each of them had been allotted. They were not afraid. The Velthun could not have done it. We would have computed the odds across our long centuries and found the sacrifice mathematically intolerable, because to a creature that lives 400 years, losing even 30 of them is a catastrophe beyond reckoning. But to a human, who would lose those years soon enough regardless, the only question was whether to spend them on something that mattered. So when Captain Vale gave the order to destroy the station, the 6 human ships did not run, and they did not surrender. They held. They fought 40 Concord warships with 6 boxes of welded metal, and they died. All of them, every soul aboard, including Ada Reyes, who kept her ship's channel open to the very end, not to plead but to record, to make sure her people 40 light-years back received every detail of how the Concord fought, every weakness, every pattern, every flaw in the beautiful patient tactics of the long-lived. She spent the last 11 minutes of her life turning her own death into a weapon for the people coming behind her. And the Concord captains watched the 6 ships burn, and Captain Orem Dask remarked, "It is in his log, I have read it 100 times. Stubborn little things. A pity. They might have made adequate servants given 1,000 years of breeding." That was the moment, the archivist says quietly. That was the exact moment, recorded to the second in our own archives, that the long-range sensors of the 9th Pursuit Fleet detected the first of the human warships arriving out of the dark. They came in fast. That word fast is the one I keep returning to because it is the whole of the thing, and it is the one quality the Concord had spent 9,000 years teaching itself to despise. The Concord fleet had positioned itself for a leisurely engagement, the kind of slow, geometric, beautiful battle the Velthun had won 40 times across 9,000 years. The kind of battle where 2 patient powers maneuvered for hours, probing, computing, where the superior mind slowly closed the trap. Captain Vale had fought a dozen such battles. He had never lost one. He had never even been hurried in one. The humans did not give him hours. They did not give him minutes. The human relief force, and this is the detail that 9,000 years of conquered pride could not survive, the detail my people erased from the record for 4 centuries. The human relief force was already at full combat speed when it arrived, because human ships did not decelerate to fight. They fought while decelerating, a maneuver so violent and so costly in crew and machine that no Velthun captain would ever have attempted it, because it shortened the lifespan of both ship and pilot enormously, and to the long-lived, anything that shortened a life was unthinkable. To the humans it was Tuesday. They came out of the dark at a speed the Concord's tactical models had categorized as impossible, not because the physics forbade it, but because no sane long-lived species would ever subject itself to those forces, and they were firing before Vale's fleet had finished registering their arrival. Crude weapons, inelegant weapons, weapons that a Velthun engineer would have been embarrassed to present at a guild review. But there were so many of them, fired so fast, from ships that turned and burned and died, and were replaced by the ship behind them without a heartbeat's pause, that the Concord's beautiful patient tactics simply had nothing to grip. You cannot slowly close a trap on an enemy that is already inside it before you finish the thought. Captain Lyadne Soar, the finest tactician of the 3, lasted the longest, and her log records her dawning, disbelieving horror with a clarity I find almost unbearable to read. She kept trying to fight the battle she had trained 9,000 years to fight. She kept reaching for the slow, elegant countermaneuver, the patient repositioning, the wise withdrawal, and every time before she could complete it, the humans had already done 3 reckless, violent things that should not have worked and somehow did, because they were not trying to win elegantly. They were not trying to preserve their ships. They were not trying to survive. They were trying to kill the conquered fleet as fast as physically possible, and they did not care what it cost them. And against that, against an enemy genuinely unafraid to die and moving at the speed that fearlessness allowed, 400 centuries of careful Velthun wisdom was worth nothing at all. Her last entry before her ship was torn apart is 4 words. We teach our children she died heroically in a defensive action against barbarians. Here is what she actually wrote in the final seconds, watching the impossible swarm of short-lived creatures burn her unbeaten fleet to slag. They were never slow. The Battle of the Karrun Drift lasted 19 minutes, the archivist says. 19. The Concord's previous shortest victory had lasted 11 hours. Vale's fleet of 40 warships, the finest the Concord had produced in 1,000 years, was annihilated in 19 minutes by a human force that took, by our own records, 60% casualties doing it, and considered the trade a bargain because they had been ready to take 100%. Captain Cethrin Vale survived, the archivist says, and there is something terrible in his voice now. He survived because the humans let him. They captured his command ship, and they did not kill him, and for a long time my people told ourselves this was because the humans feared the Concord's vengeance and wished to negotiate. That is a lie too. I have the records of his captivity. The humans let him live for a single reason, and they told it to him plainly, and I am going to tell it to you, because it is the last thing I have to say, and it is the truest thing in this entire account. They let him live so that he could go home and explain. Not as a courtesy, as a strategy. The humans understood. This short-lived, frantic, supposedly unwise species understood, instantly, what the Concord in 9,000 years of slow wisdom had never grasped, that the most useful thing a defeated enemy commander could do was carry the truth back to the people who had sent him. They did not want to fight the entire Concord. 6 ships and a relief fleet had been an enormous, nearly unbearable sacrifice. A war against the whole 9,000-year empire would have cost them everything. So instead of vengeance, they gave Vale a message, and they made sure he understood it completely, and then they sent him home. The message was delivered by the officer who had taken Ada Reyes' place, a man whose name our records did not bother to preserve, and it was brief, because the humans were always brief. They did not have the time to be otherwise. He looked at Captain Vale, at the ancient, brilliant, broken creature who had laughed at a Mayfly and watched the Mayfly burn his fleet to nothing in 19 minutes, and he said this. "You called us unrisen. You were right, we haven't risen yet. We've had a few hundred years and you've had 9,000, and look what we did with ours. Go home, Captain. Go home and tell them what you saw. Tell them to leave us alone. And then sit in your long, slow, careful life, and do the math on what will be in 1,000 years, because unlike you, we won't waste a single day of it." And Captain Vale went home, the archivist says, and he told them, and the Concord, for the first time in 9,000 years, was afraid, not of a fleet, not of a weapon, but of a single, simple, unanswerable fact that it had spent its entire history refusing to see. That the long life it had been so proud of had made it slow, and that somewhere out in the dark, there was a species that had taken the cruelest gift the universe gives, a short, desperate, frantic, death-haunted little life, and had turned it, through nothing but urgency and refusal and the willingness to die, into the most dangerous thing the galaxy had ever produced. I'm old now, the recording ends. I have spent my 400 years, and I spent them as my people spend all our years, slowly, carefully, wisely. I do not know whether that was a gift or a cage. I only know that 400 years ago, 3 of our finest captains laughed at a species that had no time, and that species answered with everything it had all at once, holding nothing back, because holding back is a luxury of the long-lived, and the humans have never been able to afford it. We called them unrisen. The truth I was given permission at the very end of my long, slow life to finally say aloud, is that they were not beneath us. They were ahead of us. They had always been ahead of us. They simply moved too fast for us to see it, and by the time we looked, the Mayflies had crossed a distance it had taken us 9,000 years to creep across, and they had done it in the time it takes a Velthun to consider whether to begin. Tell them the truth, the human officer had said. I have. It is the only apology I have, and I am out of time to offer any other.